Empire. What you see can tell you everything.
And the fact is, a lot of nonverbal communication comes in through our eyes. If you imagine talking to your children, you don't have to keep repeating their name to remind them that you're actually indeed talking to them. That's how we communicate attention and intent. And increasingly, I think the expectation is that machines will respond the way humans naturally do.
That's Anand Srivatsa, CEO of Tobii, where eye tracking technology could unlock potential. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. Connecting what you see to useful productivity and peak performance. That's the case study of Tobii, where eye tracking is viewed as a key to understanding potential. Our guest this week is Anand Srivatsa. He is the CEO of Tobii, which is a company that is in eye tracking in sports performance research. It's getting to modern sports technology and health. Thank you so much for joining us, Anand.
Thank you so much, Bram. It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about what Tobii does.
So what Tobii does is we are a company that's focused on delivering sort of the next future of human-computer interaction. The company was founded about 20 years ago with a focus on using your eyes as a way to control your computer. Over the last 20 years, we've realized that there's a huge amount of potential when you understand where somebody's looking, what they're paying attention to. It's much more than just having the next generation mouse. It actually gives much more insight into how people make decisions. And that's where we see the intersection with things like sports coming into play.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about the development of that from where it started to where it is now.
Yeah, 20 years ago, the founders of Tobii were three Swedish entrepreneurs. They were coming out of graduate school and engineering, and they were starting to see the proliferation of web cameras and cameras in general. And they realized that there was a way to use those cameras to actually get a better view of where somebody was looking, to advance the field of computer vision, which is to give sensors to machines. So they started with the technology to look at how you could deploy eye tracking in a more scalable way. Again, with the intention initially to go and make this a new way to go control a computer, much like we have mice and keyboard today. The challenge in the technology that we see is, of course, making this work for everyone. As you can imagine, you have brown-colored eyes. I have brown eyes as well. But here in Sweden, predominantly, most people have blue-colored eyes. And it turns out that the first set of technology that our founders built, they were actually very much tuned to blue eyes. And so what we've spent the last 2 decades working on is to miniaturize this technology, make it something that can work for everyone in all kinds of conditions, and make it more robust in a way that it can actually be deployed more broadly.
Okay. Well, let me ask this question then. I don't mind having a mouse. Like, why do I need this?
It's really interesting. I think, we have learned a lot of skills on how we communicate with machines. But today, the trend of machines communicating with humans on human terms is pretty clear. Imagine sort of the impact of things like Siri or Alexa. The first couple of times we needed to talk to a machine, the fact that we had to say things in a particular order, not the way we would typically communicate with each other, that's quite annoying. Of course, people who are used to it get used to it. And we're used to sort of using a mouse or hitting Control-Alt-Delete to log in. But if you think about how people interact with machines today, we expect that machines will understand how we naturally speak. And the fact is, a lot of nonverbal communication comes in through our eyes. If you imagine talking to your children, you don't have to keep repeating their name to remind them that you're actually indeed talking to them. That's how we communicate attention and intent. And increasingly, I think the expectation is that machines will respond the way humans naturally do.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to expect.
Let me just take into account the idea of, and I'm someone who gets distracted all the time. How does distraction play into this type of technology?
So fundamentally, I think when we look at sort of what we're able to do with these kinds of devices, there are many ways that this can be used in machines. For example, we've talked about some use cases relating to computers. There are examples where this can be used even in things like automobiles. And a good example there around distraction is think about you as a driver getting distracted in a car and not paying attention to the road. A car that knows where you're looking could subtly warn you to tell you, hey, you need to get back to look on the road. This is something that governments across the world are looking to add in cars as a mandatory safety feature to ensure that there are fewer accidents. And this is an example of how if machines understand what you're looking at, it can be used in ways that can really improve lives.
Would your car know if you were inebriated? This type of technology, would it know that?
There is work going on into whether or not through sort of camera systems you can understand inebriation. It's a little bit complicated because, of course, it depends on things like lighting, et cetera. But that is one of the things that the U.S. government is asking Congress to actually look at, to survey what technologies are there to, of course, reduce the terrible tolls of drunk driving.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the transition to sports. Where did you see this crossing over into major sports?
Yeah, I think the big trend we see, of course, is, and this is quite important to understand, the potential of the technology that we're working on. Humans are very much visual animals. 80% of sort of the information that comes to your brain and is processed from your brain actually is related to your vision system. So we are first and foremost a vision animal. What that means is that in order for us to take action, most of the information that we take for that action is coming from our eyes, whether it's reading or other kinds of activity. And so one of the powerful levels of insight you get when you look at what somebody's looking at before they take an action is sort of the information they've likely processed before they took a particular action. And this is actually something that happens on all kinds of skills or activities, from education to a factory worker, and of course to sports. And the more important it is to tune somebody's performance, the more important it is to understand what are the elements that have gone into a particular set of decision making. And today, I think in sports, this is incredibly important. We've seen the rise of statistics and sort of metadata that comes in to understand what is actually driving a particular athlete's performance, to predict their potential performance. And so we're seeing the use of these kinds of technologies to really understand the predictors of success or failure in a particular sport.
Okay, so when you get this type of data and you give it back to the teams, what are you telling them about performance?
Yeah, so what we see people using our technology for is they're looking, for example, let's take the case of a basketball player. They're looking at what people do before they shoot a basketball. What makes somebody a better shooter versus somebody who has a lower field goal percentage. And they're able to, of course, look at, the things that typically we'd have looked at in the past, like form. But it turns out that what your eyes are paying attention to before you shoot actually has a pretty strong correlation to how good of a shooter you are. And working on those things can improve your outcomes as a shooter. We've seen that with free throw shooting in basketball. We see that also in elements of baseball with pitchers. Are they actually spotting the target? Is their eyes staying fixed on the target or not? And that actually has a huge correlation to your predictability in your pitching. Are you actually hitting that target zone, or are you a little bit wild? And so what ends up happening is the people that are using our technology here, they're using them for two sets of things: assessing the raw capability of a person in terms of this kind of performance. The second one, of course, to then say if there's coaching that can go in to go and improve that performance. The other place that I'm pretty excited about, of course, is decision making. So, these two other things, which is free throw shooting or, throwing a baseball, those things are not necessarily at the levels of conscious decision making. But, if you imagine what we're trying to do with quarterbacks or somebody else who has to go read a defense, the question that you could look at is whether they have looked at all of the right inputs before they've made a decision of where to deliver the ball. Did they read the defense? Did they see where the cornerback was playing before they decided where they were going to make that pass? Of course, that can have a huge impact on a team's belief in the ability of one quarterback versus the other, maybe to understand how quickly somebody's able to make the decision. Was it just a good outcome, or was it a good decision that led to a good outcome?
So the idea here is you're going to potentially retrain athletes of all levels to train their eyes to look at the right things. Is that the best way to put this?
Yeah, I think what we see is there's an opportunity here to maximize performance for athletes at all levels. In order to maximize performance, I think the first thing you have to understand is what are the factors that correlate to performance. We see that having sort of your eyes focused on the right spots for targets can improve just outcomes of certain actions, shooting, throwing a ball. The second one, of course, is when the actions that are being taken need your brain to go through a set of inputs before a decision is made. That's another thing that you can go and measure by using these kinds of techniques. And you can do that, of course, live during a drill, etc. And all of those things can be pieces of inputs to either assess a player or assess an athlete on what their potential is, and of course also to help train and coach them to get the most out of their performance.
Quentin here runs a sustainable clothing brand.
Hi there.
He's excited that his shipping company, FedEx, has set a goal of having carbon-neutral operations by 2040.
Impressive.
When an influencer tweeted about his recycled bamboo t-shirts, Quentin unexpectedly became quite popular.
I'll take it.
He uses FedEx to reach new customers around the globe while making Earth a priority. FedEx, where now meets next.
And I would assume that the athletes you're working with, especially the high-level ones, who could sit there and say to you, I'm in the NBA. I clearly know what I'm doing. I've made it this far. They're open to this idea of being trained differently to look at things differently.
Yeah, again, we have a lot of coaches and other folks who use our technology with these athletes. But if I share some of the anecdotes that we get with them, the surprising aspect is that many of the axioms you learn or are taught as an athlete getting coached by coaches turns out to not always be exactly true. So I'll share a story we have from a researcher in sports performance, who actually was on his way to be a professional soccer player. A lot of the coaching that he received was sort of, and I've seen this myself in basketball, is, when you're looking at defending a player, you should be looking at their belly button. That's sort of the indicator of where they're going to be moving. Don't sort of read the fakes that are coming in with the shoulders or other things. The reality,
right? Because wherever the belly button goes, is where the ball goes. That's right. They can't fake that. But yes,
that's exactly right. And that's sort of the axiom that he was using. But he was saying, hey, by the time the belly button's moved, it's too late. You can't wait for the belly button to basically read where it is. So in fact, the best players in the world are reading other things to go and anticipate where the ball is going, not the belly button. Clearly, if you follow the belly button, you won't go the wrong way, but you'll be too late to go and react to it. So he was talking about these kinds of axioms that he's heard a lot. And when you actually put glasses on players that are really good defenders, you see that they're not watching the belly button. In fact, they may have no idea why it is that they're actually successful in anticipating the movement, but they have been coached to look at the belly button, but that's not what they're doing. And this is the kind of insight you can get when you actually see what they're looking at before something happens in game.
Yeah, that peripherally they're seeing something develop, likely, right? And that's what they're looking at. They've been prepared for whatever the situation may be, and because they're focused on the right thing, they can anticipate. They're a step ahead, technically.
Exactly. They may be looking at the lead knee. They may know that somebody who's a left-handed dribbler is going to have a certain movement here. Again, these are things with hours and hours of play that they've been engaged in, thousands and thousands of hours that they themselves may have picked up subconsciously of what's the right clue for where somebody's going. But again, the training that they're getting is looking at the belly button.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, because I'm a voice of a football team, often we talk about stances with players. That information is imperative for someone. If a right tackle is standing a certain way, it is almost definitively going to be a pass play. And therefore, if you notice that, look at that, and are paying attention to that, you have an advantage, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And let's get to decision making here, because you mentioned that. How does this technology help potentially with decision making?
Yeah. So again, if you think about how we process information visually, it takes a little bit of time for your eyes to look at something and actually register that in your brain. So, for example, if you want to get a sense of whether a quarterback has scanned the defense before they've made a decision, if you had this technology embedded in their helmet, for example, you could see where they spend time. Are they looking at the middle linebacker before they've decided where they're going to pass? Or did they basically not see the defense but still have a good outcome or a bad outcome? This kind of stuff, of course, is quite important and quite difficult to go and get if you don't have the technology available sort of almost in the helmet in real time, because these are the kinds of things that maybe a person has a view of what they were looking at or they thought they were seeing, but in reality, they were seeing something completely different. If I share another anecdote related to this, there's a soccer player, I think, at a college level who typically was a very, very good performer, but once in a while would find themselves out of position.
Yeah.
When this researcher was asking them, hey, what's going on here? They had no idea. They were like, I think everything's fine. They put these glasses on her, and then, in the next game or in their next scrimmage, I think after the scrimmage, they said, hey, what were you doing during the scrimmage? They were like, oh, I was looking at, the back line. I'm looking at where the ball's moving, et cetera, et cetera. And they go, so why were you looking at the plane? And then they go, what are you talking about? I was looking at the plane. They go, in this video, clearly we could see there are points in the scrimmage when you're looking out at trees, out at the plane, and they could start correlating to when, they were feeling mentally tired, they were losing focus, and then finding themselves sort of out of position. This was something that the athlete had no memory of, that they were focused on something different because, of course, their training is telling them you got to look at certain things. This is, I think, the kind of areas where you can sort of bring a level of knowledge into the athlete, and of course maybe come up with techniques of how you avoid that kind of behavior in the future and make sure you don't get caught in the wrong position.
I don't want to get too far off track, but like obviously in the news cycles right now is all of this technology in AI. There's a tremendous amount of interest in the large language models. And I think a number of the type of, this type of technology doesn't seem to be getting the news cycles, but it's all coming. Can you just generally give us a sense that you're working in this type of field, what you make of what's happening right now in the field of artificial intelligence?
Again, that's a very broad question.
Yeah.
Again, it's super exciting, the set of changes that are happening with generative AI. I would say that where we are is on quite a different part of the technology spectrum. I think, if we take it at the highest levels, I think it's my belief that, as we look at where technology can go, we can find great examples of how it can be incredibly helpful and powerful if it's used the right way. I think, of course, a lot of the concerns with generative AI right now is that those lines of where is technology helpful and harmful, I think they're quite blurry. And I think we need to spend a lot of time to make sure that we don't end up sort of promoting technology that ultimately will be harmful, whether it is, disrupting people in a way that their livelihoods are under attack and there's no way to go and manage that in a good way, or having information that we assume is factually correct, but is really a hallucination of an AI. I think there are some risk elements there, and I think it is, of course, moving quite quickly, so we need to be a little bit careful. But I do believe ultimately in the promise of technology. One example, I think, sort of the space we're in is actually back to the uses of this technology beyond sort of optimizing performance related to sort of athlete health. And one sort of tool that is sort of linked to this kind of technology is that we can use our solutions not just, of course, to understand what you're looking at and look at decision making, but we're able to track with very minute detail almost movements of your eyes that are below your conscious level. And these can be used to determine if you've had a concussion or a traumatic brain injury on the field. We have partners of ours that are using this technology in a VR headset. So imagine if you've actually had a collision, you can put a VR headset on and get a really quantitative assessment of whether you've had a traumatic brain injury and should probably be held out because you're at risk. That, I think, is the kind of benefit of a technology like this, which is beyond sort of just the human expectation of nonverbal communication. I think those kinds of aspects, of course, are very, very powerful. And I do believe that if technology is used the right way, they can help us deliver that kind of value.
Okay. Last thing, and I'm kind of remiss, I should have asked you this earlier, but you've mentioned glasses and wearables. How does it work? Like, can you just kind of give us a sense of how you collect the data?
Yeah, so basically the technique of eye tracking, the way it works when you need high performance eye tracking is there's a set of infrared LEDs that paints an image on your eyes. That image is detected by a camera, which allows the camera to see sort of where your pupil is exactly. And we do some complicated math to turn where your pupil is looking to the reference space that you're in the field, on a computer screen, etc. And that's sort of how we are able to determine it. The complexity for a wearable eye tracker, of course, is that it needs to be quite small, it needs to be quite close to your face, and it needs to be quite light. And these are the areas where we've been working on from an eye tracking perspective to go and make the technology more miniaturized, lower power, and still make sure that it works for everyone. that's been the challenge that we've been working on for the last 20 years.
It's really interesting. Anand Srivatsa is the CEO at Tobii. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Bram. I appreciate it.
On the next Future Sport podcast, e-racing is making strides.
Formula E has been set up from the onset to be a net zero carbon circuit, and it is really all about high performance vehicle electrification. And that's why we joined that circuit. It is around proving out technologies that will go from race to road.
That's Tim Bovin, Commercial Vice President of Mobility Science at Dow. The products company is working with Jaguar to improve the technology around energy-efficient racing. That will do it for this episode. As always, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein.